I stood in my dining room, my cheek burning from my daughter's slap, watching my son applaud like he was at some twisted theater performance. The birthday dinner I had lovingly prepared for myself lay cold and forgotten on my grandmother's mahogany table. Jessica's hand had connected with such force that my reading glasses flew across the hardwood floor, landing near Courtney's designer heels. My daughter-in-law didn't even pretend to hide her satisfaction as she examined her manicured nails with deliberate indifference. The candles on my store-bought cake flickered in the stunned silence that followed Brandon's cruel clapping. As my so-called family stood there celebrating my humiliation on my 70th birthday, I quietly excused myself to my study. Behind the false panel of my late husband's oak desk sat a safe containing an $8 million inheritance check and 3 copies of my will that would change everything. Walking into my study with trembling hands, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, gathering my composure. The weight of what had just happened in my dining room settled over me like a heavy blanket. But beneath the hurt and shock, something else stirred. Relief. For 18 long months, I had been conducting the most painful experiment of my life, and tonight had given me the final answer I needed. It started 2 years ago when Gerald Pemberton, my attorney, arrived at my door with news that changed everything. My late husband Robert's business partner had passed away, leaving Robert's share of their decades-old investment company to me. The amount was staggering $8,200,000 in liquid assets, plus real estate holdings worth another $3 million. Gerald advised me to take time processing this windfall, especially given that Robert had been gone for only 6 months. But instead of celebrating or announcing my good fortune, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I asked Gerald to keep the inheritance completely confidential while I observed how my children treated me as a supposedly struggling widow. I wanted to know if their love was genuine or if they were simply waiting for their inheritance. The test had begun innocently enough. I continued living in my modest colonial home, driving my 10-year-old Toyota and shopping with coupons. I told Jessica and Brandon that Robert's pension was smaller than expected and that I was worried about making ends meet. Their reactions revealed everything I needed to know. Jessica immediately started hinting about downsizing my living situation. She suggested I sell the family home where she and Brandon had grown up, where Robert and I had hosted 30 years of holiday gatherings. According to her calculations, I could get by perfectly well in a senior apartment complex across town. When I mentioned wanting to keep the house for sentimental reasons, she rolled her eyes and launched into a lecture about being practical versus emotional. Brandon took a different approach, positioning himself as my financial advisor, despite having no qualifications beyond a community college business certificate. He insisted on reviewing my monthly expenses, questioning every purchase from my weekly groceries to my prescription medications. When I bought myself a $20 bouquet of flowers for my birthday last year, he accused me of being financially irresponsible and living beyond my means. Courtney, Brandon's wife of 8 years, made no effort to hide her disdain. She complained constantly about the burden of having an aging mother-in-law who couldn't take care of herself. During family dinners, she would calculate the cost of my groceries out loud and suggest generic alternatives. She frequently mentioned friends whose parents had moved to assisted living facilities, always emphasizing how much happier everyone became afterward. Tonight's dinner had started like any other family gathering. I had spent the entire day preparing Robert's famous pot roast recipe, complete with herb-crusted potatoes and green bean casserole. I set the table with my wedding china and lit candles to make the evening special. When Jessica arrived, she immediately criticized the grocery store cake I had purchased, comparing it unfavorably to the expensive bakery options she preferred. The conversation quickly turned to my living situation, as it always did. Brandon launched into his familiar speech about the impracticality of maintaining a 4-bedroom house at my age. He had prepared a presentation on his tablet showing smaller apartments and their monthly costs. Courtney chimed in with statistics about fall risks in older homes and the benefits of professional meal services. When I dared to suggest that I might want to travel someday, perhaps visit my sister Margaret in Arizona, or take a cruise like Robert and I had always planned, Jessica's patience finally snapped. She accused me of being selfish and unrealistic, of living in a fantasy world where money grew on trees. That's when her hand flew across my face with a sharp crack that echoed through the dining room. Brandon's immediate applause was the cruelest cut of all. My own son, the baby I had carried for 9 months and raised with endless love and sacrifice, celebrating my humiliation. He called me delusional and said it was time someone brought me back to reality. Courtney's smirk was the final nail in the coffin of my faith in their character. As I retreated to my study, their voices carried from the kitchen. I could hear Jessica and Courtney discussing their next steps in hushed but excited tones. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could gain control of what they assumed were my few remaining assets. The test was complete, and they had failed spectacularly. Opening the safe with steady fingers, I pulled out the inheritance check and the copies of my will. For 18 months, I had lived a lie to discover the truth about my children's hearts. Now it was time to act on what I had learned. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the somber mood that had settled over my house. I was in my kitchen sipping coffee from Robert's favorite mug when I heard Brandon's car pull into the driveway at precisely 8 o'clock. Through the lace curtains, I watched him stride up my front walkway, carrying a leather briefcase, his expression serious and determined. Jessica arrived 10 minutes later with a woman I didn't recognize, someone in a sharp business suit clutching a clipboard and measuring tape. The realtor, I realized. They weren't wasting any time putting their plan into motion. "Good morning, Mother," Brandon said as he entered my kitchen without knocking, his tone artificially cheerful. "I hope you're feeling better after last night's little episode." Little episode. As if my daughter slapping me was merely a minor inconvenience to be brushed aside. "I've brought some paperwork that will help simplify your life." He continued, opening his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Power of attorney documents that will allow Jessica and me to help manage your finances and make important decisions on your behalf." Jessica bustled in behind him, followed by the realtor, who was already taking measurements of my living room with her tape measure. The woman moved through my home like she owned it, opening closets and peering into cabinets while making notes on her clipboard. "Mrs. Patterson here is just getting a preliminary assessment of the property value," Jessica explained, not meeting my eyes. "We want to know what we're working with so we can help you make the best decisions about your future." While they conducted their invasion of my privacy, I excused myself to use the bathroom. But instead of going upstairs, I slipped into Robert's old office where I kept a small security monitor connected to cameras he had installed throughout the house years ago. From this hidden vantage point, I could observe their true behavior when they thought I wasn't watching. What I witnessed made my blood run cold. Courtney had arrived and was in my study, frantically searching through desk drawers and filing cabinets. She had somehow obtained copies of my personal information and was using her smartphone to access my bank accounts online. Her face lit up as she discovered the statements for my 3 rental properties investments I had made decades ago with Robert, using money from his original business ventures. "Holy shit," I heard her whisper into her phone. "She owns 3 buildings downtown. The property records show they're worth at least $2 million. Through another camera, I watched Jessica and Brandon huddled in my kitchen, poring over financial documents they had no right to access. They had found statements from my stock portfolio carefully built over 40 years of marriage, currently worth $1.2 million. They had also discovered that my supposedly modest house was actually sitting on prime real estate worth $1.8 million in the current market. This changes everything, Brandon was saying, his voice thick with greed. We're not talking about managing a few $1,000s in Social Security payments. We're talking about over $5 million in total assets. She's been lying to us, Jessica replied, anger creeping into her voice. Acting poor while sitting on this fortune. We need to move fast before she does something stupid like giving it away to charity or wasting it on some ridiculous cruise. I watched in fascination as their concern for my well-being transformed into naked avarice right before my eyes. Courtney was already researching high-end nursing facilities, calculating how much money they could save by placing me in the cheapest option while pocketing the difference. She had pulled up real estate websites and was browsing luxury homes in gated communities using my projected inheritance as her budget. The realtor was taking detailed photographs of every room, including the valuable antiques and artwork Robert and I had collected over the years. She was building a complete inventory for a quick sale, obviously at Jessica's direction. Brandon was on his phone with someone discussing expedited guardianship procedures. He was explaining to whoever would listen that his mother was becoming increasingly unstable and needed immediate intervention before she made any financial decisions that might jeopardize the family's future. We need a doctor who understands the situation, he was saying. Someone who can provide the necessary documentation to show that she's no longer competent to manage her own affairs. From my hidden position, I reached into my pocket and activated the digital recorder I had purchased the previous week. Every word of their conspiracy was being captured in crystal clear audio. Gerald Pemberton had advised me to document everything if I suspected financial elder abuse, and this certainly qualified. Their callousness was breathtaking. Not once did they express concern for my emotional well-being after the traumatic events of the previous evening. Not once did they acknowledge that slapping me had been wrong or that their behavior might have been hurtful. Instead, they were focused entirely on gaining control of assets they believed belonged to them. As I watched them systematically cataloging my possessions like vultures picking over a carcass, I felt the last vestiges of motherly loyalty drain away. These people were strangers wearing the faces of my children. The real Jessica and Brandon, if they had ever existed, had been replaced by greedy imposters who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their financial gain. The most chilling moment came when I overheard Courtney researching the legal requirements for having someone declared mentally incompetent in our state. She was taking notes about the necessary medical evaluations and court procedures, building a roadmap for stealing my autonomy along with my assets. The key is finding the right doctor, she explained to Jessica. Someone who understands that we're trying to protect her from herself. I found a psychiatrist who specializes in geriatric cases. He has a reputation for being very thorough in his assessments. I knew exactly what kind of assessment they had in mind. They were planning to buy a diagnosis that would give them complete control over my life and fortune. The innocent mother they had known was about to disappear forever, but not in the way they expected. Slipping back upstairs to my bedroom, I retrieved my cell phone and began making calls of my own. Gerald Pemberton needed to know what was happening, and I needed to accelerate my own timeline. If my children wanted to play hardball, I was more than ready to accommodate them. 3 days passed before their next move, but I spent every moment preparing for what I knew was coming. Gerald had connected me with a private investigator named Tony Rodriguez, a former police detective who specialized in elder abuse cases. Tony was a soft-spoken man in his 50s, with graying temples and kind eyes that missed nothing. He had immediately understood the gravity of my situation and begun documenting everything. Meanwhile, I discovered the identity of their chosen weapon, Dr. Harold Finch, a psychiatrist whose medical license had been flagged multiple times for questionable practices. Tony's research revealed that Dr. Finch had gambling debts exceeding $200,000 and a history of providing convenient diagnoses for families seeking guardianship of elderly relatives. The meeting between Jessica and Dr. Finch took place at the Riverboat Casino on Thursday evening. Tony had followed Jessica from her office and photographed the entire exchange from across the parking lot. Through his telephoto lens, we captured images of Jessica handing Dr. Finch a manila envelope thick with cash, while Brandon waited in the car as their lookout. Tony had managed to get close enough to record their conversation using sophisticated surveillance equipment. Dr. Finch explained his methodology with chilling professionalism. "I'll conduct a comprehensive evaluation in her home environment," he told Jessica. "The key is asking questions that would confuse anyone under stress, then documenting her responses as evidence of cognitive decline. I'll also note any signs of paranoia or defensive behavior, which are common symptoms of dementia." "How long will the process take?" Jessica asked, counting out bills with practiced efficiency. "The evaluation itself takes about 2 hours. I'll have my report ready within 24 hours, diagnosing moderate cognitive decline, requiring supervised care. The paperwork will recommend immediate guardianship to prevent further deterioration." Brandon leaned into their conversation. "What if she seems too sharp during the evaluation? What if she answers everything correctly?" Dr. Finch smiled coldly. "That's why I use specialized testing methods. I ask rapid-fire questions designed to overwhelm, then interpret any hesitation as confusion. I also include family testimony about concerning behaviors that may not be apparent during a brief office visit." "We can provide plenty of examples," Courtney chimed in from the back seat. "She's been making irrational statements about travel and spending money on unnecessary items. We're genuinely concerned about her judgment." The $15,000 changed hands without ceremony. Dr. Finch pocketed the money and shook hands with my children, sealing their corrupt bargain. They scheduled the evaluation for the following Tuesday, giving themselves time to coach Dr. Finch on what symptoms to find and what conclusions to reach. I spent the weekend preparing for their ambush. Dr. Sarah Martinez, my longtime family physician, conducted a comprehensive cognitive evaluation that I passed with flying colors. She provided detailed documentation of my excellent mental health, including memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and psychological assessments. Her report would serve as a powerful contrast to whatever fabrication Dr. Finch produced. Tony installed additional security cameras throughout my house, capturing every angle of my living spaces. If Dr. Finch was going to conduct a fraudulent evaluation, we wanted every moment documented in high-definition video with clear audio. Tuesday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully in my most conservative outfit, wanting to appear as a typical grandmother rather than someone who might pose a threat to their scheme. When Dr. Finch arrived at my door carrying his medical bag and clipboard, I greeted him with appropriate confusion and slight nervousness. "Mrs. Henderson." He began settling into my living room chair with authority. "Your family has expressed some concerns about your well-being. I'm here to conduct a routine evaluation to make sure you're getting the support you need." He was a thin man with calculating eyes and soft hands that had never done manual labor. His questions began innocuously enough, asking about my daily routine and medical history, but gradually they became more complex and rapid-fire, designed to overwhelm and confuse. "What's the current year, month, and date?" he asked, scribbling notes furiously. 2023 November, and today is Tuesday the 14th, I replied accurately. Can you count backward from 100 by sevens? I began the sequence correctly, then deliberately hesitated at the third number, pretending to lose track. His pen moved faster across his notepad. Tell me about your financial situation. Are you able to manage your bills and expenses? This was the crucial moment. Well, money is tight since Robert died, I replied with calculated uncertainty. Sometimes I forget if I've paid things. Jessica and Brandon have been helping me, but I get confused about all the paperwork. I see, Dr. Finch nodded knowingly. And have you been making any large purchases or financial decisions recently? I bought flowers last week, I said, allowing my voice to sound defensive. Brandon got upset about the cost, but they were so pretty. For 2 hours, Dr. Finch conducted his fraudulent examination, while hidden cameras recorded every manipulative question and leading statement. He asked me to remember lists of words, then interrupted my concentration with unrelated questions, before demanding I recall what I had been told. When I showed any sign of normal human confusion, he documented it as cognitive impairment. The most damning moment came when he asked about my family relationships. I decided to give him exactly what he was paid to find. Sometimes I wonder if Jessica and Brandon really love me. I admitted, allowing genuine pain to creep into my voice. They seem so impatient lately, always talking about money and what's best for me. I feel like I'm becoming a burden. Dr. Finch's eyes lit up as he wrote down what I could only assume was evidence of paranoid delusions. He was getting exactly what he needed to justify his predetermined diagnosis. After he left, I immediately called Tony to confirm that everything had been recorded successfully. The video footage showed Dr. Finch conducting a deliberately confusing examination designed to produce evidence of cognitive decline rather than accurately assess my mental state. That evening, my family celebrated their success at Romano's Italian restaurant, the same place where Robert and I had celebrated our anniversary every year. Tony had followed them there and captured their entire conversation using long-range audio equipment. Dr. Finch says the evaluation went perfectly, Jessica announced over expensive wine. He found clear evidence of moderate cognitive decline requiring supervised care. What kind of evidence? Courtney asked, practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. Confusion about dates, difficulty with mathematical calculations, paranoid statements about family members. Brandon listed off like he was reading from a shopping list. Everything we need for an emergency guardianship hearing. How quickly can we move forward? Jessica inquired, already calculating her newfound wealth. Dr. Finch says we can file the paperwork tomorrow. With his medical recommendation, the court will likely grant temporary guardianship within a week, Brandon replied. They spent the rest of their dinner planning my future without any input from me. Jessica would handle my daily care and medical decisions. Brandon would manage all financial matters and real estate transactions. Courtney would research appropriate care facilities and handle the logistics of relocating me. Not once during their 2-hour celebration did they express sadness about my supposed cognitive decline. Not once did they discuss how to help me maintain my independence or dignity. They were planning to strip away my autonomy and warehouse me in a nursing home while they divided up my assets like pirates splitting treasure. But what they didn't know was that Tony had recorded their entire conspiracy. Dr. Martinez had documented my perfect mental health, and Gerald Pemberton was preparing legal countermeasures that would turn their scheme inside out. The real evaluation was just beginning, and this time my children were the ones being tested. The following Tuesday morning, I sat in the passenger seat of Brandon's sedan as we drove to the county courthouse. He had insisted on driving me to the guardianship hearing, explaining that I might be too confused to navigate the legal proceedings on my own. Jessica sat in the back seat, periodically patting my shoulder with false reassurance, while reviewing her testimony notes one final time. "Don't worry, Mother," she kept saying. "This is all for your own good. We just want to make sure you're safe and properly cared for." Courtney had stayed home to research nursing facilities, armed with a list of my supposed assets and a budget for my future care. She was planning to visit the 3 most affordable options that afternoon, already calculating how much money they could save by choosing the cheapest alternative. The courthouse was an imposing granite building that had stood in the center of our town for over a century. As we walked through the metal detectors and up the marble stairs to the family court division, I maintained the confused, slightly frightened demeanor that Dr. Finch had documented. Jessica kept a protective arm around my shoulders, playing the role of the concerned daughter to perfection. Judge Patricia Hawkins presided over Courtroom C, a wood-paneled chamber with tall windows that cast long shadows across the witness stand. She was a stern-looking woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes, who had handled thousands of guardianship cases during her 20-year career. What she didn't know was that Gerald Pemberton had quietly filed several motions that morning that would dramatically alter the trajectory of these proceedings. Mawa for case number 4789, Peterson versus Henderson, Judge Hawkins announced as we took our seats at the plaintiff's table. "This is a petition for emergency guardianship based on alleged cognitive decline." Jessica stood to present her opening statement, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Your Honor, my mother, Alvara Henderson, is 70 years old and has been exhibiting signs of serious mental deterioration since my father's death 2 years ago. We're here today because we love her and want to protect her from making decisions that could jeopardize her safety and financial security." She painted a picture of a confused old woman who forgot to pay bills, made irrational purchases, and expressed paranoid delusions about family members trying to control her money. According to Jessica's testimony, I had become increasingly isolated and defensive, refusing reasonable suggestions about downsizing my living situation or accepting help with financial management. She talks about taking expensive trips and buying luxury items when she can barely afford her basic living expenses. Jessica continued dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "We're terrified that she'll fall victim to scammers or make impulsive decisions that will leave her destitute." Brandon's testimony was equally compelling and equally false. He described finding unpaid bills scattered throughout my house, expired food in my refrigerator, and evidence that I had been giving money to telephone solicitors. He expressed deep concern about my ability to live independently and manage my financial affairs without supervision. "My mother has always been a proud, independent woman," he said, his voice heavy with manufactured sadness. "But pride can't protect her from the reality of her declining mental capacity. She needs professional care and financial oversight to ensure her remaining years are safe and comfortable." Dr. Finch took the witness stand with professional confidence, presenting his fraudulent evaluation as legitimate medical evidence. He described my performance on cognitive tests, highlighting every moment of normal human confusion as proof of dementia. His testimony was smooth and convincing, supported by official-looking documentation and medical terminology that impressed the court. Based on my comprehensive evaluation, Mrs. Henderson exhibits moderate cognitive decline, consistent with early-stage dementia, he testified under oath. She demonstrates short-term memory deficits, difficulty with complex problem-solving, and paranoid ideation regarding family members. I recommend immediate supervised care to prevent further deterioration and protect her from financial exploitation. When it came time for my testimony, I played my part to perfection. I appeared confused by simple questions, forgot details about dates and times, and expressed vague suspicions about my children's motives that sounded exactly like the paranoid delusions Dr. Finch had described. "I don't understand why everyone is so worried about money," I said, allowing my voice to quaver with uncertainty. "I just want to live in my own house and take care of myself like I always have." Judge Hawkins listened patiently to all testimony before rendering her decision. Based on the medical evidence presented by Dr. Finch and the family testimony documenting my declining condition, she granted temporary guardianship to Jessica and Brandon, pending a full psychological evaluation in 60 days. This court recognizes the difficulty of these proceedings for all family members involved, Judge Hawkins concluded. However, the evidence clearly indicates that Mrs. Henderson requires supervised care and financial oversight to protect her well-being. Jessica and Brandon exchanged triumphant glances as they signed the guardianship documents. They now had legal authority to make all decisions regarding my living situation, medical care, and financial assets. Their first order of business was visiting my bank to gain access to my accounts and begin liquidating my holdings. But their celebration was short-lived. When they arrived at First National Bank with their court-ordered documents, they discovered that my checking and savings accounts contained only $50,000 combined. The financial statements they had found in my house had shown balances exceeding $5 million. Where was the rest of the money? The bank manager, Mrs. Carol Stevens, reviewed their paperwork carefully before explaining that most of my assets had been moved to other institutions months earlier. The 3 rental properties had been sold in September according to county records. The stock portfolio had been liquidated in August. All they could access were my basic operating accounts, with enough money to cover household expenses for about 6 months. "There must be some mistake," Brandon insisted, his voice rising with panic. "We have documentation showing she owns property worth millions of dollars." "I can only provide access to accounts at this institution," Mrs. Stevens replied diplomatically. "Perhaps you should speak with Mrs. Henderson's attorney about other holdings." That afternoon, they tore my house apart looking for additional bank statements, safety deposit box keys, or investment documents. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. Gerald Pemberton had helped me move everything to secure offshore accounts and shell corporations months earlier, all perfectly legal and completely hidden from their greedy eyes. Brandon discovered a safety deposit box key in my jewelry drawer and raced back to the bank with Jessica, certain they had found my hidden treasure. But the box contained only family photographs, my grandmother's jewelry, and a handwritten note that read, "The real treasure was the family I thought I had." As night fell, they sat in my kitchen making frantic phone calls to accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors, desperately searching for traces of the fortune they believed they had secured. They had won the legal battle but discovered that the prize was worthless. What they didn't know was that Gerald Pemberton was preparing the next phase of our plan, one that would expose their corruption to the entire community and ensure that justice was served in the most public way possible. The call came at 6:37 in the morning on a crisp Friday in December. I was sipping coffee in my private suite at the Greenwood Medical Center, registered under the name Margaret Thompson, when Gerald Pemberton's assistant contacted Jessica with the devastating news that would change everything. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm so sorry to inform you that your mother passed away peacefully in her sleep last night," came the carefully rehearsed announcement. The medical staff at Mercy General did everything they could, but her heart simply gave out. Through the security cameras that Tony had left installed in my house, I watched Jessica receive the phone call in my kitchen. Her initial reaction was shock, then what appeared to be grief followed quickly by barely concealed excitement as the implications sank in. She immediately called Brandon, who arrived within 20 minutes, carrying a briefcase filled with estate planning documents they had been preparing for months. Courtney's reaction was the most telling. When Brandon shared the news, her first question was about life insurance policies and the timeline for probate proceedings. She had already pulled up luxury real estate websites on her laptop and was browsing homes in gated communities with price ranges that matched their expected inheritance. "We need to move fast," Brandon told Jessica as they stood in my kitchen making funeral arrangements with theatrical grief. "The sooner we get through probate, the sooner we can liquidate the estate and divide the assets." Jessica nodded, already mentally spending money she believed was now hers. "I'll handle the funeral arrangements. Something simple and dignified, nothing too expensive. We don't want to waste money on unnecessary frills when Mother would have wanted us to be practical." Their version of simple and dignified involved the cheapest casket available, minimal flowers, and a brief service at the funeral home rather than a church ceremony. They scheduled everything for the following Tuesday, allowing just enough time for required legal notifications, but not enough for distant relatives to make travel arrangements. The most heartbreaking moment came when Jessica called my sister Margaret in Arizona to share the news. I listened through hidden recording devices as she delivered the information with perfect theatrical sorrow. "Margaret, I have terrible news about Alvara." Jessica began, her voice expertly modulated to convey grief. "She passed away peacefully in her sleep last night. The doctors said her heart just couldn't handle the stress anymore." Margaret's genuine anguish came through clearly in her response. "My sister had been trying to warn me about my children's behavior for months, but I had asked her not to interfere with my test of their character. Now she blamed herself for not pushing harder to protect me from their manipulation. I should have visited more often." Margaret sobbed across the phone line. "I should have seen the signs of her decline and done something to help." "There was nothing anyone could have done," Jessica replied with false comfort. "Mother had been struggling with dementia for months. We all did our best to keep her comfortable and safe." That lie stung more than any of their previous deceptions. They were already rewriting history to make themselves look like devoted caregivers rather than the financial predators they actually were. The funeral itself was a masterpiece of fake mourning. Jessica delivered a eulogy that painted her as a loving daughter who had sacrificed everything to care for her aging mother. Brandon spoke about my wisdom and strength, conveniently forgetting his applause when Jessica slapped me. Courtney played the role of supportive daughter-in-law, dabbing at dry eyes with tissues while mentally calculating inheritance distributions. Local news covered the service because of my late husband Robert's prominence in the business community. The reporter interviewed Jessica and Brandon about their loss, giving them a platform to cement their public image as grieving children who had done everything possible for their beloved mother. "Alvara Henderson was a pillar of our community," Jessica told the camera with practiced sincerity. "She taught us the value of hard work, family loyalty, and living within your means. We'll miss her wisdom and gentle guidance every day." The irony was suffocating. These were the same people who had slapped me, applauded my humiliation, and conspired to steal my autonomy and assets. Now they were presenting themselves as loving family members devastated by loss. Gerald Pemberton had scheduled the will reading for Friday afternoon at the community center rather than his law office, explaining that the large number of beneficiaries required a bigger venue. Jessica and Brandon assumed this meant I had left small gifts to various friends and charities while reserving the bulk of my estate for family. They arrived at the community center dressed in expensive black clothing, their grief carefully calculated for maximum public sympathy. But their composure began cracking when they saw the size of the crowd that had gathered. The main hall was packed with over 200 people, including representatives from every major charity in town, directors of local nonprofits, and dozens of community members they didn't recognize. "Why are all these people here?" Courtney whispered nervously to Brandon as they took seats in the front row. Maybe Mother was more involved in charity work than we realized, he replied, but uncertainty was creeping into his voice. Gerald stood at the podium with a thick legal document, his expression grave and professional. Local television cameras had been allowed inside to record the proceedings, supposedly because of the significant charitable bequests that would impact the entire community. We are gathered today to honor the final wishes of Alvara Henderson. Gerald began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Mrs. Henderson was very specific about how she wanted her estate distributed, and she insisted that this reading be conducted publicly to ensure transparency and accountability. Jessica and Brandon exchanged confused glances. I had never expressed interest in public ceremonies or transparent estate planning. This wasn't matching their expectations at all. To my daughter Jessica Patterson. Gerald read from the will, who taught me that love cannot be bought. I leave the sum of $1 and the lesson that greed destroys everything it touches. Jessica's face went white. The crowd murmured in surprise. To my son, Brandon Henderson, who showed me the difference between family and blood relations, I leave the sum of $1 and the hope that he will someday understand the value of genuine affection. Brandon shot to his feet. This is impossible. There's been some mistake. Gerald continued reading without pause. To my daughter-in-law, Courtney Henderson, who helped me realize that respect must be earned rather than demanded, I leave the sum of $1 and the wish that she finds happiness that doesn't depend on other people's misfortune. The rest of my $8 million estate was divided among local charities, $2 million to the Children's Hospital, $1 million to the Animal Shelter, $1 million to the Homeless Shelter, $1 million to the Public Library System, $1 million to the Senior Center, $1 million to the Food Bank, and the remainder to establish a fund for elder abuse prevention. But the real shock came when Gerald announced that I had documented their conspiracy to defraud me, including their bribery of Dr. Finch and their fraudulent guardianship petition. Mrs. Henderson was fully competent when she created this will, Gerald continued. She was also fully aware of her family's attempts to exploit her through medical fraud and legal manipulation. She has provided extensive evidence of their criminal conspiracy to the appropriate authorities. That's when I walked into the community center very much alive, accompanied by FBI agent Maria Santos and local police detective Captain Williams. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs as Jessica and Brandon stared at me like I was a ghost returned from the grave. Hello, children, I said, my voice steady and strong. I think we need to have a family conversation. The silence in the community center was deafening as I walked down the center aisle toward the front of the room. Jessica's face had gone completely white while Brandon looked like he might be sick. Courtney had started crying, but whether from shock or fear, I couldn't tell. FBI agent Maria Santos stepped forward, her badge clearly visible on her dark blue suit jacket. She was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of authoritative presence that commanded immediate respect. Captain Williams flanked her left side, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. Ladies and gentlemen, Agent Santos announced to the crowded room, I apologize for this disruption, but we have federal warrants for the arrest of Jessica Patterson, Brandon Henderson, and Courtney Henderson on charges of elder abuse conspiracy to commit fraud and violation of federal banking regulations. The television cameras captured every moment as Jessica tried to stand on unsteady legs. This is insane, she stammered, her voice cracking with panic. My mother died 3 days ago. We buried her. This is some kind of mistake or sick joke. Mrs. Alvara Henderson is very much alive, Agent Santos replied calmly. She has been working with our office for the past 6 months to document and expose a criminal conspiracy targeting elderly Americans. Your case has helped us identify a network of corruption involving medical professionals, legal advocates, and family members who prey on vulnerable seniors. Brandon's attorney training kicked in as he tried to assert some control over the situation. We demand to see identification and warrant documentation. This is harassment based on false accusations from a clearly unstable individual. Agent Santos handed him the arrest warrants with professional efficiency. Dr. Harold Finch was arrested at his medical office this morning on charges of medical fraud and elder abuse. He has already provided a full confession detailing his arrangement with your family, including the $15,000 payment he received to provide false medical testimony. The confession that Dr. Finch had provided was devastating in its completeness. Facing federal charges that could result in decades in prison, he had cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed that Jessica and Brandon's case was just one of dozens of similar schemes he had facilitated over the past 5 years. We have video and audio recordings of your conspiracy. Agent Santos continued, including surveillance footage of the cash payment to Dr. Finch, recordings of your planning sessions in Mrs. Henderson's home, and documentation of your fraudulent use of guardianship powers to access financial accounts. Tony Rodriguez stood near the back of the room, having documented every aspect of their criminal behavior with professional precision. His investigation had uncovered a pattern of elder abuse that extended far beyond my family. Dr. Finch had been providing false diagnoses to enable financial exploitation of elderly victims across 3 states. The federal charges were extensive and serious. Jessica faced 7 years in federal prison for elder abuse conspiracy to commit fraud and identity theft. She had used my personal information to open credit accounts in my name, running up debts that she planned to discharge through my supposed incompetency. Brandon was looking at 8 years for forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy charges. The power of attorney documents he had prepared contained fraudulent signatures and false statements about my mental capacity. His legal background made his crimes more serious, as he had used his knowledge of the law to circumvent protections designed to safeguard elderly citizens. Courtney faced 6 years for identity theft, conspiracy, and violation of privacy laws. Her illegal access to my financial records using stolen personal information had enabled the entire scheme. Computer forensics had revealed that she had researched similar cases, online learning techniques for exploiting elderly family members from criminal forums and illegal advice websites. But the most damaging evidence came from the recordings of their own conversations. Gerald played selected excerpts for the stunned community center audience, including their celebration dinner at Romano's restaurant, where they had toasted their success in manipulating the legal system. The defendants believed they were stealing from a confused, helpless elderly woman, Agent Santos explained to the crowd. What they didn't realize was that they were confessing their crimes to federal investigators who were building a case against a criminal network that has victimized hundreds of seniors across the region. Dr. Sarah Martinez took the witness stand to testify about my perfect mental health, contrasting her legitimate medical evaluation with Dr. Finch's fraudulent assessment. Her testimony highlighted the difference between genuine medical care and the corruption that had infected certain sectors of geriatric medicine. Mrs. Henderson's cognitive function is excellent for someone of any age, Dr. Martinez explained. She shows no signs of dementia, depression, or any other condition that would impair her judgment or decision-making capacity. Dr. Finch's diagnosis was not only wrong, it was deliberately fabricated to support a criminal conspiracy. The community response was overwhelming. Representatives from the charities that had received bequests in my will spoke about the impact of elder abuse on vulnerable populations. The The director of the senior center talked about warning signs that family members and friends should watch for when elderly loved ones suddenly become isolated or fearful. Margaret had flown in from Arizona as soon as Gerald contacted her about the real plan. She testified about her attempts to warn me about my children's behavior and her relief that I had been smart enough to protect myself. Her testimony was particularly powerful because it showed that concerned family members had recognized the warning signs that Jessica and Brandon had dismissed or ignored. I called Alvara dozens of times trying to get her to see what was happening, Margaret told the court through tears. But she was conducting her own investigation, gathering evidence to protect not just herself, but other seniors who might become victims of this same type of exploitation. The federal investigation had revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond my case. Dr. Finch had been working with lawyers, social workers, and financial advisors to identify wealthy elderly clients who could be exploited through fraudulent guardianship proceedings. My case had provided the evidence needed to expose the entire operation. As Jessica, Brandon, and Courtney were led away in handcuffs, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. These were people I had loved and raised, but they had chosen greed over family loyalty. Their arrest was painful but necessary to prevent them from victimizing other vulnerable seniors. The media coverage was extensive, with my story becoming a cautionary tale about family financial abuse and the importance of protecting elderly citizens from exploitation. The case prompted legislative changes to strengthen guardianship oversight and require additional safeguards for vulnerable adults. But more than anything, I felt validation that my 18-month test of their character had revealed their true nature before they could succeed in destroying my life. The inheritance they thought they were stealing would instead fund programs to protect other seniors from similar exploitation. 5 years have passed since that dramatic day in the community center, and I often reflect on how profoundly my life has changed. The federal trial proceedings moved swiftly once Dr. Finch provided his full cooperation to investigators. His testimony revealed a criminal network that had been operating across multiple states for nearly a decade. Jessica received her 7-year sentence and is currently serving time at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. The judge noted that her role as the primary instigator of the conspiracy warranted the maximum penalty allowed under federal sentencing guidelines. Her appeals have been unsuccessful, and she won't be eligible for parole until she serves at least 85% of her sentence. Brandon's 8-year sentence reflected the court's view that his legal training made his crimes particularly egregious. He had sworn an oath to uphold the law and protect vulnerable citizens, then used his knowledge to exploit his own mother. He's serving his time at the federal prison camp in Pensacola, Florida, where he works in the library teaching literacy classes to other inmates. Courtney received 6 years and is incarcerated at the Federal Medical Center in Lexington, Kentucky. She has participated in rehabilitation programs focused on financial responsibility and family relationships, though I have no indication that she truly understands the harm her actions caused. Dr. Harold Finch received a 12-year sentence for his role as the ringleader of the medical fraud conspiracy. His cooperation with investigators helped expose 43 additional cases of elder abuse across 7 states. The court ordered him to pay restitution to all victims, though most of the money he received through his criminal activities had been lost to gambling debts. The financial restitution orders required my children to pay for all legal costs associated with their prosecution, plus damages for the emotional distress they caused. Since they have no assets and limited earning potential while incarcerated, this debt will follow them for the rest of their lives. I used the first $2 million of my inheritance to establish the Elder Protection Foundation, which provides legal assistance to seniors facing financial exploitation by family members. Our offices are located in the renovated carriage house behind my original family home, which I kept as our headquarters despite moving to a beautiful retirement community called Sunset Gardens. The foundation has helped 87 elderly victims seek justice against family members, caregivers, and medical professionals who attempted to exploit them financially. We work closely with law enforcement agencies, providing training on recognizing elder abuse and resources for building strong criminal cases. Our annual scholarship program provides funding for social workers specializing in geriatric care, with particular emphasis on recognizing and preventing financial exploitation. We've awarded 32 scholarships over the past 5 years, creating a new generation of professionals dedicated to protecting vulnerable seniors. My memoir titled The Inheritance Test: A Mother's Journey from Betrayal to Justice became a bestseller within 6 months of publication. The proceeds fund additional legal aid programs and public education campaigns about elder abuse prevention. I've spoken at over 100 conferences, congressional hearings, and community events sharing my story to help other seniors recognize warning signs of family exploitation. The legislative changes inspired by my case have strengthened protections for elderly Americans nationwide. The Henderson Elder Protection Act requires multiple medical evaluations for emergency guardianship proceedings and mandates criminal background checks for anyone seeking guardianship authority over vulnerable adults. Sunset Gardens has become my true home, surrounded by a community of genuine friends who value my company rather than my bank account. My closest friend here is Eleanor Mitchell, a retired teacher who shares my passion for mystery novels and afternoon tea. We spend hours discussing books, politics, and our children, though her stories about grandchildren visiting every weekend provide a stark contrast to my family situation. James Patterson entered my life 2 years ago during a foundation fundraising event. He's a retired civil rights attorney who spent his career fighting institutional corruption, and he immediately understood the importance of our mission. Our relationship developed slowly from professional collaboration to personal friendship to something deeper and more meaningful. James lost his wife to cancer 15 years ago and understands the complexities of starting over in your 70s. We share a love of classical music, historical documentaries, and long walks through the botanical gardens near Sunset Gardens. He's become my partner in both the foundation work and life itself, proving that genuine love can flourish at any age when built on mutual respect and shared values. The most gratifying aspect of our foundation work is the thank you letters we receive from seniors who avoided exploitation because they recognized warning signs we've publicized. One woman in Oregon contacted us after her son began pressuring her to sign financial documents she didn't understand. Armed with information from our website, she consulted an independent attorney and discovered that her son was attempting to steal her Social Security benefits. Margaret visits regularly from Arizona, and our relationship has grown stronger through this ordeal. She often says that my courage in exposing the conspiracy has inspired her to be more assertive in her own family relationships. Her adult children treat her with the respect and appreciation that every parent deserves. The hardest part of my new life is accepting that I will likely never have a relationship with Jessica or Brandon again. They write occasional letters from prison, usually around holidays or birthdays, but their communications focus on their legal appeals rather than accepting responsibility for their actions. They seem to believe they were victims of an unfair system rather than criminals who chose to exploit their elderly mother. Courtney's children. My grandchildren have been placed in foster care because no family members were available to take custody. I've established education trust funds for both children, ensuring they'll have opportunities for college and professional training despite their mother's criminal actions. I hope someday they'll understand that their grandmother tried to break the cycle of exploitation that might have continued to the next generation. The community response to my story has been overwhelmingly positive. Local businesses display foundation literature in their waiting rooms, and many seniors have attended our educational seminars about protecting themselves from financial exploitation. The local newspaper runs a monthly column I write about senior safety and empowerment. My daily routine now includes morning yoga, afternoon volunteer work at the foundation office, and evening social activities with friends at Sunset Gardens. I'm learning to paint watercolor landscapes and have joined a book club that tackles challenging literature. James and I travel frequently visiting national parks and historical sites that Robert and I never had time to explore. The $8 million that remained after establishing the foundation has grown substantially through careful investment management. I live comfortably, but not extravagantly, believing that wealth should be used to create positive change rather than simply accumulate for its own sake. Last month, I testified before a Senate subcommittee about elder abuse prevention, sharing my story with lawmakers who are considering additional federal protections for vulnerable adults. The hearing room was packed with advocates, family members, and seniors who have faced similar exploitation. As I concluded my testimony, I looked out at the audience and saw faces that reflected my own journey from victimization to empowerment. These were people who had learned that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfish, but necessary for maintaining the dignity and independence that every person deserves, regardless of age. The most important lesson I've learned is that self-worth must come from within rather than from other people's approval or affection. For too many years, I allowed my children to define my value based on their needs and expectations. The inheritance test revealed that their love was conditional on my compliance and financial generosity. Real love doesn't demand sacrifice of dignity or autonomy. Real family relationships are built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and support that flows both ways. The friends I've made at Sunset Gardens and through the foundation demonstrate daily what healthy relationships look like. My story has a happy ending because I chose to fight back against exploitation rather than accept it as inevitable. Every senior citizen has the right to make their own decisions, control their own resources, and live with dignity regardless of family pressure or societal expectations. I want to ask you something important. Have you seen warning signs of elder abuse in your own family or community? Do you know a senior who seems increasingly isolated, fearful, or controlled by family members who claim to have their best interests at heart? If so, please don't ignore those red flags. Contact your local Elder Services office, the Elder Protection Foundation, or law enforcement agencies that specialize in these crimes. Remember that speaking up for vulnerable seniors isn't interfering in family business. It's protecting human dignity and preventing life-destroying crimes. Share this story with friends and family members who might need to hear it. Like this video, if it helped you understand the signs of elder abuse. Subscribe to stay informed about senior safety and empowerment issues. Your awareness and action could save someone from the exploitation I experienced. Thank you for listening to my story and supporting our mission to protect elderly Americans from financial exploitation. I hope my experience helps you recognize that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, seek justice, and build the life you truly deserve. At 75 years old, I'm living proof that the best chapters of your life story can begin when you refuse to let other people write the ending for you.